The life of Abraham, as recorded in the book of Genesis, is one of the most pivotal narratives in religious history, revered in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. His journey is marked by profound acts of faith and can shape the future of his descendants. Below is a detailed narrative of his life. Early life and call of Abram. Abraham was originally named Abram, and he was born in the city of Ur of the Chaldeans, a prosperous Mesopotamian city. He was the son of Terah and lived with his extended family. Abram's early years were shaped by the polytheistic culture of Ur, yet God singled him out for a unique purpose. At the age of 75, Abram was living in Haran when God first appeared to him. The Lord commanded Abram to leave his country, his people, and his father's household and journey to an unknown land that God would show him. God promised to bless him, make him into a great nation, and through him, all the peoples on earth will be blessed. Genesis 12:3. Abram, displaying great faith, obeyed immediately. He left Haran with his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and their possessions and servants, and they journeyed towards Canaan. Upon arriving in Shechem in the land of Canaan, God appeared to Abram again, promising that this land would belong to his offspring. Abram built an altar to the Lord there and later in Bethel, marking these places of divine encounter. Famine in Canaan and Abram in Egypt. Shortly after arriving in Canaan, a severe famine struck the land. To survive, Abram and his household traveled to Egypt. Fearing that the Egyptians might kill him to take Sarai, whom he described as beautiful, Abram instructed her to say that she was his sister rather than his wife. This half-truth, Sarai was his half-sister, led to Pharaoh taking Sarai into his palace. However, God intervened, sending plagues upon Pharaoh's household. When Pharaoh discovered the truth, he rebuked Abram, but allowed him to leave Egypt with Sarai and all their possessions. Abram and Lot part ways. After returning to Canaan, Abram and Lot's flocks grew so large that disputes broke out between their herdsmen. To avoid conflict, Abram graciously offered Lot the first choice of land. Lot chose the fertile plains of Sodom and Gomorrah, while Abram settled in the less fertile regions of Hebron. Though Lot chose the better land, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were infamous for their wickedness, a choice that would later lead to Lot's misfortune. Abram built another altar to the Lord in Hebron. God then reaffirmed his promise that all the land of Canaan would belong to Abram's descendants forever, despite the fact that Abram remained childless. God's covenant with Abram and the birth of Ishmael. Years passed, and Abram still had no children. Sarai, now growing old, began to doubt whether God's promise of a multitude of descendants could be fulfilled through her. She suggested that Abram take her maidservant Hagar as a wife, so that she might bear children on Sarai's behalf. Abram agreed, and Hagar conceived a son, Ishmael. However, conflict quickly arose between Sarai and Hagar fled into the desert. God appeared to Hagar, telling her to return to Sarai and promising that her son Ishmael would also become the father of a great nation. Hagar returned, and Ishmael was born when Abram was 86 years old. Though Ishmael was Abram's firstborn, God made it clear that the child of promise would not come through Hagar, but through Sarai. 13 years later, when Abram was 99, God appeared to him again and made a new covenant with him. God changed Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of many nations, and Sarai's name to Sarah, meaning princess. God promised that Sarah would bear a son, even though she was well past childbearing age, and that the covenant would be established through this child. As a sign of this covenant, God instituted circumcision as a physical mark of his people. Abraham circumcised himself, Ishmael, and all the males in his household as an act of obedience to this covenant. The promise of Isaac and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Shortly after the covenant, 3 visitors, whom Abraham recognized as messengers of God, appeared at his tent near the oaks of Mamre. Abraham showed them great hospitality, offering them food and rest. During the meal, one of the visitors, God himself, told Abraham that Sarah would give birth to a son within a year. Sarah, overhearing the conversation, laughed in disbelief due to her old age. But God replied, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Genesis 18:14. Before the visitors left, God revealed to Abraham his intention to destroy the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Concerned for Lot, who lived in Sodom, Abraham interceded on behalf of the cities, pleading with God to spare them if righteous people could be found there. God agreed, but even 10 righteous people could not be found in Sodom. Nevertheless, God sent angels to rescue Lot and his family before raining down fire and brimstone upon the cities. Lot's wife, disobeying the angel's command not to look back at the city, turned around and was turned into a pillar of salt. Lot and his daughters fled to the mountains, where they survived, though their later actions would lead to the birth of the Moabites and Ammonites. The birth of Isaac. True to his word, God fulfilled his promise to Abraham and Sarah. At the age of 90, Sarah gave birth to a son, and they named him Isaac, meaning laughter, for Sarah had laughed at the prospect of bearing a child in her old age. Isaac was the child through whom God's covenant would continue, marking the fulfillment of years of waiting and faith. However, tension arose between Sarah and Hagar after Isaac's birth. Sarah demanded that Hagar and Ishmael be sent away, not wanting Ishmael to share in Isaac's inheritance. Though distressed, Abraham did as Sarah requested after receiving assurance from God that Ishmael would also become the father of a great nation. God watched over Hagar and Ishmael as they wandered in the desert, and Ishmael eventually settled in the region of Paran, becoming the father of the Arab nations. The test of Abraham's faith, the binding of Isaac. Perhaps the greatest test of Abraham's faith came years later when God commanded him to take Isaac, the promised child, to Mount Moriah and offer him as a burnt sacrifice. This request must have been agonizing for Abraham, as Isaac represented the fulfillment of God's promise and the future of his lineage. Nevertheless, Abraham obeyed without hesitation. He took Isaac and traveled to the mountain, carrying the wood for the offering. As they climbed, Isaac, unaware of what was happening, asked his father, "Where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham replied, "God himself will provide the lamb." Genesis 22:8. When they reached the top, Abraham built an altar and prepared to sacrifice Isaac. But just as he raised the knife, an angel of the Lord called out, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy." God provided a ram caught in a thicket to be sacrificed in Isaac's place, reaffirming his covenant with Abraham for his obedience. This event, known as the binding of Isaac, or Akedah, became a powerful symbol of faith and foreshadowed later theological concepts in Christianity and Judaism regarding sacrifice and divine provision. The later years of Abraham. After the test on Mount Moriah, Abraham returned to his home. As Sarah aged and eventually died, Abraham mourned deeply for her. He purchased the cave of Machpelah in Hebron as a burial place, and there he laid her to rest. This cave would later become the burial site of Abraham himself, as well as Isaac, Rebekah, and Jacob. As Abraham neared the end of his life, he arranged a marriage for Isaac. He sent his servant back to his homeland to find a suitable wife, and the servant returned with Rebekah, who became Isaac's wife. This ensured that the covenant would continue through Isaac's line. Abraham lived to be 175 years old, and he saw many of God's promises fulfilled during his lifetime. After his death, he was buried in the cave of Machpelah alongside Sarah. Conclusion. Abraham's life is one of extraordinary faith, obedience, and perseverance. Despite the long years of waiting, the trials, and the tests, Abraham remained steadfast in his belief in God's promises. His journey from Ur to Canaan, the birth of Isaac, and the covenant that established him as the father of many nations are foundational to understanding the unfolding of the biblical narrative. His story, filled with moments of triumph and testing, continues to inspire millions of believers around the world, representing the power of faith in the face of uncertainty and the trustworthiness of divine promises.